the last meal has a special place in culture. It's something that we're kind of fascinated with. Not just a morbid curiosity. It was originally seen as one last act of humanity and grace before a person's execution. Because there's one thing that unites everyone. You gotta eat. No matter who you are, if you are a living saint or the most unrepentant of offenders, we all gotta eat. Even on our last day. And it can be a fun thought exercise. Someone were to ask you, if you knew a meal was going to be your last, what would you want it to be? Something extravagant? Something pretty rare? Something that's so hard to find that it's going to take them forever? And while they're trying to find it, you can postpone and try to escape? One of my favorite episodes of the wonderful show King of the Hill, which if you haven't seen it, and you're a Texan, you should just watch an episode or two. Because, well, it perfectly encapsulates what it's like to live here. But it deals with this very question. Several guys are sitting around, and they're talking about this. What do you want your last meal to be? They're sitting and they're kind of debating, and they decide, you know what? Why just think about it? We can make that dream a reality. And so off they go to the grocery store, and they are going to make the last meal, the perfect meal. And as they sit around a table filled with prime rib and steak, turkey, cakes, pies, and what it can only be described as an obscene amount of shrimp. They toast to the last meal. And then no one takes a bite. They keep trying to get somebody else to take that first bite. Because, well, there's this lingering suspicion that this theoretical last meal might actually become their last meal. But even outside the world of TV, the last meal takes a prominent place. Typically, after an execution, the state publishes both the condemned person's last words and their last meal. And if you look at the list of requested last meals, you'll see a theme. It's not always a fancy spread. More often than not, it's comfort food. Hamburgers, ice cream, French fries, cup of coffee, fried chicken and okra. Something to give them a taste of home. Just a little bit of peace in their final days. Some use that chance to make a statement. One requested a clump of dirt. Because, well, that's how he had been treated. One person used their last meal and asked to be provided with justice, equality, and world peace. Unsurprisingly, that was denied because, well, it wasn't technically a meal. Before his execution in 2011, Lawrence Russell Brewer, he asked and received 2 chicken fried steaks, smothered in gravy, sliced onions, a triple meat bacon cheeseburger with all the fixings on the side, a cheese omelet with ground beef, tomatoes, onions, bell peppers, and jalapenos, a large bowl of fried okra with ketchup, 1 pound of barbecue, 1/2 a loaf of white bread, 3 fajitas with fixings, a meat lover's pizza, 2 3 root beers, 1 pint of Bluebell vanilla ice cream, and a slab of peanut butter fudge with crushed peanuts. I don't know about you. That sounds like a pretty good meal to me. And when it was delivered, he looked at those providing the meal. They all laid it all out on the table and said, "I'm not hungry." He refused to eat. Not because he wasn't actually hungry, but because he wanted to make a statement. And his refusal to partake in this extravagant meal, it triggered Texas lawmakers to actually end last meal request altogether. The last meal is a fascinating thing. Because if you knew this was going to be your last meal, what would you want it to be? How would you want it? Would it be someone you wanted to share it with? Something particular you wanted to do? When you look back at the list of last meal requests in France, there is an unsurprising amount of people who just requested a cigarette. Because that's what they wanted, their last day. Let's look at a last meal. Jesus and the disciples, they gathered together to celebrate Passover. They gathered to celebrate the deliverance of God's people out of the hands of Egypt. The deliverance out of slavery and bondage. They gathered together to celebrate God providing, God delivering, and God making a new nation. It's a meal that some of you have actually been a part of. Now, Jesus' Passover celebration, it looks a little different than ones we might have seen if you've been to a home of a Jewish family or someone who celebrates Passover. Because things evolve, they change over time. And here, to celebrate Passover, Jesus and the disciples, they keep it simple. Because, well, they don't have much money. They go into a room, and for his last meal, Jesus gives them bread and wine. But not only that, Jesus, he knows that in less than 24 hours, he's going to be dead. He's going to die. But he looks around the room at those who followed him through the pain, through the tribulation, through the healings, through the good times, through the scary. They've been with him. And he wants to do one last thing before he leaves. And so he gets down, he takes off his robe, he grabs a towel. And the last thing he does is feed them and wash their feet. He welcomes them to the table. Not in just saying, "Hey, we're so glad you're here." But he washes their feet. Because that's what you do before a banquet. They know it's bread and wine. They've been with Jesus this entire time. But in that day, that age, before a banquet, the guest would come in. And the servants, whoever the host was, they would get the water. They would wash all the guests' feet. As well, if you're reclining at a table and someone has just walked a long way on a dirt road, feet are not going to be pretty appetizing, are they? So he prepares them come to the table just like a host throwing a grand banquet. In this small room, Jesus says, yes, welcome to my table. Welcome to my feast. Welcome to my celebration. He washes their feet. Which is a funny thing to do. Because he is their leader. He's the one that they have been following. And washing the feet was a nasty job. It was something that only a slave would do. No person, no upright person of good moral fortitude would dare wash feet. It was dirty. It's disgusting. But what does Jesus do? He bends down and washes their feet, cleans them. He says, welcome to my table. What does he feed them? Bread, yes. Wine, yes. But it's so much more. Because Jesus, in his final hours, tells his disciples, this bread, this is not just bread. This is my body. And it's given for you. This wine, this cup, this is not just wine. This is my blood. And it's poured out for you. For many. For the forgiveness of sins. In his last meal on earth, Jesus gives the disciples himself. And tonight, we celebrate that. Because tonight, Jesus gives us himself. His body, his blood, poured out for us. He invites us to his table, just like he did those disciples. It says, take and eat. This is my body given for you. This is my blood poured out for you. In his final meal on earth, when he could have done anything else, he could have had steak. He could have had a meat lover's pizza. But what does Jesus do? He feeds us. Feeds us with himself. And that's why we celebrate. That's why. Because we have a table spread with anything we could want. But what could be sweeter than the body of Christ? What could be sweeter? What could be better than the blood that was poured out for us, for our salvation? And that's why we're here. Week in and week out, Christ invites us to the feast. But, there's always a but. This feast is just an appetizer. Because we know that there is a greater feast. There's a greater feast coming. Where we sit at the table with Jesus. Not just as disciples, but as his bride. Where we feast. Feast and feast. We feast in the body of Christ, the bread in heaven. Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. So therefore let us keep the feast.